Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now let's begin this one. Chapter 1. Before the Storm. Arthur Kirkpatrick stood in the nursery he'd spent 3 months building, running his hand over the twin cribs he'd assembled with his own hands. The room still smelled of fresh paint, soft yellow walls with hand-stenciled clouds. His wife, Tina Kirkpatrick, waddled in, 8 months pregnant, her hand supporting her lower back. "Stop fussing, Arthur," she said with that smile that had pulled him out of darkness 4 years ago. "They're perfect." Arthur wasn't his real name. Not entirely. Sergeant Major Arthur Ghost Kirkpatrick had earned his call sign in the sandboxes and mountains of 32 countries, hunting war criminals for Delta Force's most classified unit. But that was before Miller's Crossing, before Tina found him drinking himself to death in a VA hospital parking lot, before she'd looked at this hollow-eyed killer and seen something worth saving. "Just want everything ready," he said, pulling her close. At 41, with a face that had seen too much, he'd never imagined this. A second chance, a family, peace. "They'll be here in 4 weeks," Tina said, placing his hand on her belly where their sons kicked with increasing urgency. "Then you'll be too exhausted to worry." Miller's Crossing, Kentucky wasn't much. Population 8,000, surrounded by hills that turned emerald in spring and gold in fall. Arthur had chosen it precisely because it was nowhere. No one asked questions at the hardware store where he worked. No one cared that he sometimes woke screaming. Tina taught 3rd grade at Miller's Crossing Elementary, where everyone knew her as Mrs. Kirkpatrick, the teacher who stayed late to help struggling students. That afternoon, Arthur watched her drive away in their aging Honda Civic toward the prenatal appointment in Lexington. He wanted to come, but the store was short-staffed. She'd kissed his cheek and promised to be home by 6. She never made it. Meanwhile, across town in the Hall estate, a sprawling antebellum mansion that dominated Miller's Crossing like a threat, Derek Hall snorted his 3rd line of cocaine off his father's desk. At 26, Derek had the chiseled features and easy charm of old Southern money, corrupted by the absolute certainty that consequences were for other people. "Derek, your father's on the phone," his mother, Celia Hall, called from the doorway, her eyes deliberately avoiding the white powder residue. Senator Grant Hall had been Kentucky's senior senator for 16 years, a position he'd inherited from his father and planned to pass to Derek. The Hall family had owned Miller's Crossing since 1847, the lumber mill, half the commercial real estate, and every politician who mattered. Derek ignored his mother, sliding into his custom Porsche 911 GT3, a 23rd birthday present. The cocaine sang in his blood as he roared down Route 42, pushing 90 on the winding Tulane Highway. His phone buzzed, another girl, another party. The world was his amusement park. He never saw the Honda Civic until he was already passing it on a blind curve, forcing Tina off the road. Arthur's phone rang at 4:47 p.m. The voice on the other end belonged to Sheriff Russell Bray, a man Arthur had nodded to at the diner but never truly met. "Mr. Kirkpatrick? There's been an accident. Your wife's at St. Mary's Hospital. You should come now." The 15-minute drive took 8. Arthur walked into controlled chaos, doctors shouting, his wife's screams echoing from the emergency room. A nurse tried to stop him, but something in his eyes made her step aside. Tina was on the table, blood everywhere, her face twisted in agony. "Arthur, the baby's—" He held her hand as they performed an emergency C-section. The first twin, the boy they planned to name James, came out silent. Blue. The second, Matthew, never drew breath. The doctors worked frantically, but Arthur had seen enough death to recognize its presence. For hours later, he sat beside Tina's bed as she slept, sedated. The twins were gone. His wife had a shattered pelvis, 3 broken ribs, and injuries that meant she'd never carry another child. The doctor's words echoed. "She's lucky to be alive." Arthur wasn't sure luck had anything to do with it. Chapter 2. The Untouchables. Sheriff Russell Bray arrived at St. Mary's the next morning, his considerable bulk filling the hospital room doorway. He was 56, with the weathered face of a man who'd spent 30 years in Kentucky law enforcement. His uniform was immaculate, his badge polished to a mirror shine. "Mr. Kirkpatrick, I need to ask your wife some questions about the accident." Tina was awake but broken, her eyes vacant. Arthur stood between her and the sheriff, every instinct screaming danger. "What happened?" Arthur asked, his voice carrying the flat calm that had preceded violence in a dozen countries. Bray shifted, uncomfortable. "Witness says she swerved off the road. Lost control on the curve near Blackburn's farm. These things happen." "Witness?" Arthur interrupted. "What witness?" Derek Hall was driving behind her. Says she was driving erratically, maybe fell asleep at the wheel. Bray wouldn't meet his eyes. "It's a tragedy, but there's no evidence of another vehicle's involvement." Arthur felt something cold settling into his chest. Derek Hall, the senator's son. "Now, Mr. Kirkpatrick, my wife doesn't fall asleep driving. She's the most careful person I know." Arthur's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. "And there's paint on her car. Silver paint. From whatever hit her." Bray's expression hardened. "I've examined the vehicle. Any paint could have come from the guardrail she hit. There's no proof." "Then investigate. Check Hall's car for damage." The sheriff actually laughed, though it sounded forced. "The Hall family has been part of this community for over a century. Derek Hall is a respected member of society. I'm not going to harass him based on wild accusations from—" He caught himself, but Arthur heard the unspoken words. "From an outsider. From someone who doesn't understand how things work here. So you're not going to do anything." Bray stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Let me explain how things work in Miller's Crossing. The Hall family owns this county. The lumber mill employs half the town. Senator Hall's influence extends to the governor's office. Derek Hall is untouchable. You're new here, so I'll give you some advice. Bury your boys, take care of your wife, and move on. That's all you can do." After Bray left, Arthur sat in silence, watching Tina sleep. His phone buzzed, a text from his former commanding officer, Colonel Santos Bennett, now stationed at Fort Campbell. "Heard about Tina. I'm sorry, Ghost. If you need anything." Arthur stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Just information. Everything on Grant Hall and his family." Quietly, the response came minutes later. "You sure about this?" "They killed my sons." "Yes, I'm sure. I'll make some calls." "Ghost, be careful. These aren't Taliban. You can't just disappear them." Arthur pocketed his phone and walked to the hospital chapel, empty at this hour. He'd stopped believing in God somewhere between Kandahar and Mosul, but he sat in the pew anyway, staring at the cross. 22 years in Delta Force. 47 missions across 32 countries. He'd hunted warlords, terrorists, and war criminals. Men who'd killed thousands. He'd found them in bunkers, in palaces, in spider holes in the desert. The Ghost always found them. Derek Hall had killed his sons. The Ghost was back. Chapter 3. Gathering Intelligence. Over the next week, as Tina slowly healed physically while breaking apart emotionally, Arthur began his reconnaissance. It was what he did best: observe, analyze, plan. Miller's Crossing revealed itself to him like a map of enemy territory. The Hall family controlled everything through a web of influence that made feudal lords look democratic. Grant Hall had been senator for 16 years, but the family's power ran deeper. His father, Franklin Hall, had been a congressman. His grandfather had owned the original lumber mill. They'd intermarried with every powerful Kentucky family, creating a network of cousins, uncles, and in-laws who held position from district attorney to state police captain. Derek was the youngest child and only son. His sisters, Leanne Hall Drake and Jamie Hall Roberts, had married into banking and real estate respectively. Derek himself worked nominally as Director of Community Relations for Hall Industries, a position that required him to show up drunk to ribbon cuttings. Arthur's investigation revealed a pattern. Over the past 8 years, Derek had been involved in 7 incidents, 2 DUIs dismissed, 3 assault charges dropped, a sexual assault allegation that disappeared, and a hit-and-run that the victim mysteriously declined to pursue. Each time, Sheriff Bray had handled the investigation. Each time, Derek walked away clean. The information from Colonel Bennett arrived in encrypted files, financial records, property deeds, military intelligence assessments of regional corruption. Grant Hall had used his position to funnel federal contracts to Hall Industries. Derek's cocaine habit was supplied by a Mexican cartel with connections to Kentucky through family friend and local prosecutor Roland Drake. But the most interesting detail came from an unexpected source. Arthur had started having coffee every morning at Nellie's Diner, an institution in Miller's Crossing run by Nellie Merrill, a 72-year-old woman who'd been serving eggs and gossip since 1973. She'd known everyone, seen everything, and had the sharp eyes of someone who missed nothing. "You're the man whose wife got hurt," she said one morning, refilling his coffee without asking. "Arthur Kirkpatrick. I know who you are. Hardware store, keeps to yourself, married to that sweet teacher." She glanced around, then sat across from him. "I also know Derek Hall ran her off the road. I know because he's done it before." Arthur's attention sharpened. Before, 5 years ago, young man named Pedro Hobbs. Derek was racing drunk, ran Pedro into a ditch. Pedro ended up paralyzed from the waist down. Sheriff Bray ruled it single-vehicle accident. Hall family paid Pedro's medical bills, quietly, and he left town. She leaned closer. "But I remember, and there are others who remember too. Why are you telling me this?" Nellie's weathered face showed something hard as stone. "Because the Halls have owned this town for too long. Because Derek Hall is a cancer, and nobody has the courage to cut it out. You seem like a man who might." She slid a piece of paper across the table. 5 names with phone numbers. Pedro Hobbs, now living in Tennessee. Margaret Prince, a woman Derek had assaulted in college. Christian Trevino, a former Hall Industries employee fired after reporting safety violations. Kirk Best, a deputy sheriff who'd quit the force after Bray ordered him to destroy evidence. And Harry Minor, a lawyer who'd tried to sue the Halls and been disbarred through their influence. "Talk to them," Nellie said. "They've been waiting for someone like you." That night, Arthur sat in the nursery that would never be used, surrounded by cribs and tiny clothes meant for sons who would never wear them. Tina was asleep, lost in prescription medication that kept the nightmares at bay. He opened his laptop and began making calls. Chapter 4, Building the Case. Pedro Hobbs answered on the 3rd ring. At 31, his voice carried the weight of someone aged beyond his years. "Who is this?" "My name is Arthur Kirkpatrick. Derek Hall ran my pregnant wife off the road 2 weeks ago. She lost our twins. I was told you might understand what that means." Silence. "Then, meet me, but not in Kentucky." They met in a truck stop outside Nashville. Pedro sat in a wheelchair, his eyes hollow. "Derek Hall destroyed my life," he said simply. "I was 26, engaged, working construction. One night, he came racing down Route 42, drunk and high. Forced me into a ravine. I woke up in the hospital paralyzed. My fiancée left. I lost my career. Everything. The sheriff said it was my fault. Said I was speeding, lost control. But I know what I saw. That silver Porsche pushing me off the road. Derek Hall's face laughing behind the wheel. Pedro's hands clenched on his chair's armrests. The Halls paid me $300,000. Called it humanitarian assistance. I took it because I had no choice. Medical bills were crushing me. But the money came with a non-disclosure agreement and an implied threat. Take this and disappear or face worse. Would you testify if I could guarantee your safety? Against the Halls? In Kentucky. Pedro laughed bitterly. You'd need more than guarantees. You'd need a miracle. Let me worry about that. I need you to write down everything you remember. Every detail. Dates, times, witnesses. Can you do that? Something flickered in Pedro's eyes. The first hint of hope in 5 years. Who are you really, Mr. Kirkpatrick? Someone who finds people who think they're untouchable. Margaret Prince was harder to locate. The Halls had buried her assault allegation so thoroughly that it existed only in whispered rumors. Arthur finally found her through a women's shelter in Louisville, working as a counselor. She was 34, with the careful manner of someone who'd learned to protect herself. They met in a public park, her conditions. Derek assaulted me during my junior year at University of Kentucky, she said, watching children play on swings nearby. There was a fraternity party. I woke up in his room, my clothes torn, bruises on my wrists and thighs. I reported it. Campus police investigated. 3 witnesses said they saw Derek follow me upstairs. Medical examination confirmed assault. What happened? Senator Hall's lawyers happened. They claimed I'd been drinking voluntarily, that I'd pursued Derek, that I'd regretted a consensual encounter and fabricated the assault to embarrass an influential family. They had photographs, somehow, of me at previous parties taken out of context. Character witnesses who'd been paid or threatened into lying. The university's Title IX office was pressured to drop the investigation. I was advised to consider my future and withdraw the complaint. Her hands trembled as she continued. I did. I was 20 years old, facing an army of lawyers and a family that owned half of Kentucky. I transferred schools, changed my name from Prince to her mother's maiden name Martinez, try to forget. But I never did. Would you testify if Derek Hall could actually face consequences? If the Halls couldn't make it disappear? She met his eyes. Yes. God, yes. But how? Arthur leaned forward. I'm building a case that can't be buried. Multiple victims, documented pattern of behavior, evidence that goes beyond one county's corrupt sheriff. But I need every detail you can remember, every witness, every piece of proof you still have. I kept everything. Police report, medical records, witness statements. The university tried to destroy them, but I made copies. She paused. Who are you, Mr. Kirkpatrick? Someone who's done with asking permission for justice. Kirk Best, the former deputy sheriff, met Arthur in a bar outside Louisville. He was 42, working private security, with the bitter expression of a man who'd compromised his integrity and hated himself for it. I know why you're here, he said, ordering whiskey straight. Derek Hall, you're not the first person to ask questions. You'll just be the first stupid enough to do something about it. Tell me about the evidence. Kirk drank deeply. 6 years ago, Derek beat a man nearly to death outside a bar in Lexington. College kid named Anthony Shannon. The kid said Derek started it over a girl, kept hitting him even after he was down. Witnesses confirmed it. I was first deputy on scene. Collected evidence. Derek's bloody knuckles, torn shirt, witness statements. And Sheriff Bray ordered me to lose it. Literally took the evidence box from my desk and burned it in the parking lot incinerator. Told me the Halls had clarified the situation. The victim suddenly recanted, said he'd started the fight, apologized to Derek. I found out later the Halls paid his medical school tuition, $200,000 in exchange for perjury. You quit. 3 months later. Couldn't stomach it anymore. But I'm not brave enough to go on record. Bray would make sure I never worked law enforcement again. The Halls would destroy what's left of my life. Arthur studied the broken man across from him. What if Sheriff Bray couldn't protect them? What if the case went federal, beyond his jurisdiction? Kirk looked up sharply. Federal? You'd need federal crimes. Civil rights violations, corruption under color of law, racketeering. That's a massive investigation. I have time, and I know people. Arthur slid a burner phone across the table. When I need your testimony, I'll call this number. Keep it on you. And Kirk, you quit because you still had a conscience. Don't lose it now. Over the following weeks, Arthur assembled his case like a Delta Force mission plan. He documented everything. Derek's pattern of violence, Sheriff Bray's systematic obstruction of justice, the Hall family's use of money and influence to corrupt the legal system. He cross-referenced dates, compared evidence, identified witnesses. Through Colonel Bennett's connections, he learned that the FBI had a nascent investigation into political corruption in eastern Kentucky, but they lacked the evidence to move on powerful families like the Halls. The Department of Justice had an email tip line for civil rights violations. Arthur began feeding them information anonymously. But documentation wasn't enough. He needed something dramatic, something that would force the Halls out of the shadows and into a trap they couldn't escape. He needed Derek to make a mistake. Chapter 5, The Trap. Tina came home after 3 weeks in the hospital, physically healing but emotionally shattered. She barely spoke, took her medication, and stared at the empty nursery with hollow eyes. Arthur held her at night when she woke screaming, reliving the accident, feeling their sons die inside her. He's still out there, she whispered one night. Derek Hall, living his life like nothing happened. Not for long, Arthur promised. He'd learned Derek's patterns. The clubs he frequented, the bars where he dealt cocaine, the college parties where he found vulnerable women. Derek was predictable. Arrogant men always were. They believed their invulnerability, so they never varied their routines. Arthur began following him. Not obviously. The ghost knew how to surveil without being seen. He learned Derek's schedule, his dealers, his friends. He noted the Porsche 911, now with fresh silver paint on the passenger side, covering damage Derek had claimed was from parking lot carelessness. Through an auto body contact Colonel Bennett provided, Arthur obtained photographs of the Porsche's repair, extensive damage to the passenger side, scratches consistent with forcing another vehicle off the road, paint transfer matching Tina's Honda. The mechanic, Christian Trevino's cousin, had kept detailed records despite being paid for silence. But Arthur needed more. He needed Derek caught in an act so egregious that even the halls couldn't cover it up. He needed federal attention, media coverage, public outrage that made Sheriff Bray irrelevant. The opportunity came from an unexpected source. Through his surveillance, Arthur learned Derek was planning something he called the Freshman Hunt, a tradition where Derek and his friends invited new University of Kentucky students to an off-campus party, got them intoxicated, and targeted the most vulnerable women. It was disgusting, predatory, and according to Margaret Prince, exactly how Derek had assaulted her. The party was scheduled for September 12th at a Hall family vacation property, a remote cabin in the hills outside Miller's Crossing, far from witnesses or help. Arthur made calls. To Colonel Bennett, I need surveillance equipment. Professional grade. To Kirk Best, I need you to trust me one more time. To a contact from his Delta days now working FBI domestic terrorism, I'm about to hand you a corruption case on a silver platter, but you need to move fast when I call. To his wife, Arthur said nothing. She couldn't know what he was planning. For her own protection, for her own conscience, she had to remain ignorant. On September 12th, Arthur arrived at the cabin before Derek. He was ghost again, moving through the woods like smoke, placing high-definition cameras in the cabin's main rooms. Living area, bedrooms, kitchen, audio equipment, backup power supplies. Everything recording to encrypted cloud storage accessible by law enforcement. He'd sent anonymous tips to the FBI and state police. Credible information about drug trafficking and potential sexual assault at this location, tonight, with detailed evidence attached. Derek arrived at 8 p.m. with 3 friends and 2 terrified freshman girls, Beth Harrison and Stacy Montgomery, both 18, both promised a fun party by older students they trusted. Arthur watched from the tree line as Derek and his friends plied the girls with alcohol and cocaine. As Beth started to resist Derek's advances. As Derek's charming mask slipped away, revealing the monster underneath. Arthur had planned to wait for law enforcement, to let the system work. But when Derek grabbed Beth by the throat and threw her toward a bedroom, when her scream cut through the night, something primal took over. The ghost moved. He entered through the back door silently. Derek's friends were in the living room, too drunk and high to notice. Arthur disabled them with brutal efficiency, nerve strikes that left them unconscious without permanent damage. Derek emerged from the bedroom, frustrated by Beth's continued resistance. He found Arthur waiting. "Who the fuck are you?" Derek demanded, cocaine brave and stupid. "You don't remember me?" Arthur's voice was surgical cold. 2 months ago, Route 42. You ran a pregnant woman off the road." Derek's eyes widened with recognition and fear. "Oh shit, the hardware guy. Listen, that was an accident." Arthur moved. One punch to Derek's solar plexus, folding him over. A strike to the temple, controlled. Not to kill, just to incapacitate. Derek crumpled. "Beth, Stacy." Arthur called toward the bedroom. "Come out. You're safe now." The terrified girls emerged. Arthur handed them his phone. "Call 911. Tell them you were assaulted, that there are drugs and weapons here. Stay on the line until police arrive. And don't be afraid. Everything that happened is recorded. They can't hurt you." He zip-tied Derek and his friends, arranged them in positions clearly showing their guilt, placed bags of cocaine in plain view, made sure every camera angle was perfect. Then he disappeared into the woods minutes before Sheriff Bray's cars arrived, followed closely by state police who'd responded to the FBI tip. Chapter 6. The First Domino. The arrest of Derek Hall made regional news. 4 wealthy young men caught in a cabin with 2 freshman girls, drugs, and video evidence of attempted sexual assault. Sheriff Bray tried to downplay it, but state police had jurisdiction. The FBI was now involved due to the drug quantities suggesting trafficking. More importantly, the cloud-stored videos went viral. Someone, Arthur made sure, leaked edited footage showing Derek's assault attempt, his casual drug use, his friend's predatory behavior. Within 48 hours, it had 3 million views. Senator Grant Hall held a press conference. "My son is innocent of these charges. This is a political attack designed to embarrass my family during an election year. Derek has struggled with substance abuse, but he's not a predator. These girls consented to everything." That was when Margaret Prince went public. Standing before cameras in Louisville, using her real name for the first time in years, she detailed Derek's assault during her college years. The cover-up, the pressure, the Hall family's threats. "Derek Hall is a serial predator protected by money and power," she said clearly. "I'm done being silent." Pedro Hobbs gave interviews from his wheelchair about the hit and run that paralyzed him, producing the non-disclosure agreement that proved the Halls had paid for his silence. 3 more women came forward with assault allegations. 2 men described Derek's violent attacks. A former Hall Industries employee detailed how Senator Hall used federal contracts corruptly. The dam broke. The FBI expanded their investigation. The Department of Justice opened a civil rights inquiry into Sheriff Russell Bray's pattern of protecting the Halls. Media descended on Miller's Crossing like locusts. And through it all, Arthur watched from the shadows, feeding information to journalists, providing evidence to federal investigators, ensuring every piece of his carefully constructed trap snapped shut. Chapter 7. The Reckoning Begins. The Hall family fortress began crumbling from within. Senator Grant Hall's poll numbers plummeted as details of his son's crimes dominated news cycles. His Democratic opponent surged ahead, running ads featuring Margaret Prince's testimony and the viral cabin footage. Derek sat in county jail, bail set at $5 million, too high even for the Halls to easily manage without liquefying assets. His lawyers, the best money could buy, found themselves facing federal prosecutors with an airtight case. Video evidence, multiple witnesses, documented pattern of behavior spanning years. But Arthur wasn't finished. Through Colonel Bennett's intelligence network, he discovered the deeper corruption. Sheriff Bray had been on the Hall family payroll for 12 years, receiving monthly payments disguised as security consulting fees. District Attorney Roland Drake had received campaign contributions totaling $800,000 from Hall Industries and affiliated companies. 3 county commissioners had similar financial ties. Arthur compiled everything into a massive evidence file and sent it simultaneously to the FBI, Department of Justice, Kentucky Attorney General, and the Washington Post investigative team. The resulting scandal implicated 27 public officials across 4 counties. Sheriff Russell Bray was arrested on October 23rd, charged with obstruction of justice, corruption under color of law, and civil rights violations. His perp walk was broadcast statewide. When confronted outside his mansion by reporters, Senator Grant Hall finally showed his true face. "My family built Miller's Crossing. We employ half this county. Without us, this town would die. My son made mistakes, but he doesn't deserve this witch hunt." The mask had slipped. The patrician senator revealed himself as a feudal lord who believed his wealth entitled him to operate above the law. The backlash was immediate and devastating. But the Halls weren't going down without a fight. With their political influence crumbling and Derek facing 20 years in federal prison, they became desperate, dangerous. Grant Hall hired private investigators to identify who had orchestrated the exposure. They traced the cabin surveillance equipment, the leaked videos, the coordinated witness revelations. The trail led them to Arthur Kirkpatrick, the quiet hardware store worker nobody had paid attention to. Arthur knew they were coming. He'd been waiting for it. The first attempt was crude. 2 thugs sent to persuade him to back off. They caught Arthur in the hardware store parking lot after closing. Big men, professionally violent, armed with tire irons. The ghost didn't just disable them. He made sure they were found by Miller's Crossing police, now under state supervision, beaten and zip-tied, with recorded confessions on their phones admitting Grant Hall had paid them $20,000 to rough up the Kirkpatrick guy. Another charge. More evidence of the Hall's willingness to use violence and intimidation. The second attempt was more sophisticated. An anonymous email to Tina's school district questioning Arthur's background, suggesting he had a violent criminal history that made him unsuitable to be around children. It was designed to isolate him, hurt his wife, destroy their remaining stability. Arthur had anticipated this too. Through Colonel Bennett, he'd already contacted the Department of Defense, which issued a carefully worded statement confirming Arthur's 22 years of honorable military service, multiple commendations, and classified clearances, all of which required extensive background checks that would have revealed any criminal history. The school district apologized to Tina. The Hall family lawyer who'd sent the email was sanctioned by the state bar for harassment. Each attack Arthur turned into evidence. Each desperate move by the Halls tightened the noose around their necks. Chapter 8. The Trial of Derek Hall. Derek Hall's trial began on November 14th in federal court in Louisville, moved there due to the impossibility of finding impartial jurors in Miller's Crossing. The prosecution laid out a devastating case. Video evidence from the cabin showing Derek's attempted assault of Beth Harrison. Testimony from Beth and Stacy Montgomery about Derek's predatory behavior. Margaret Prince's assault allegations, corroborated by university police reports the Halls had tried to destroy. Pedro Hobbs's hit-and-run testimony, with medical records and the coerced non-disclosure agreement. For additional assault victims who'd remained silent for years. Expert testimony about Derek's pattern of violence, substance abuse, and sense of immunity. Financial records showing the Hall family's systematic payments to silence victims. Sheriff Bray's testimony, given in exchange for reduced charges, about Grant Hall's direct orders to obstruct justice. Arthur sat in the gallery every day, watching. Tina was beside him, slowly rebuilding her strength, finding purpose in witnessing justice. Derek's defense crumbled. His lawyers tried to argue entrapment. Someone had set up the cabin surveillance. But the prosecution countered that recording a crime in progress wasn't entrapment. They tried character witnesses, but every person who spoke for Derek was revealed to have financial ties to the Hall family. On the sixth day, Derek himself took the stand, against his lawyer's advice. Cocaine had given him false courage for years. Arrogance was his permanent state. I made mistakes, he admitted. I have a drug problem. I need treatment, not prison. But I never raped anyone. Those women wanted to be with me. They're only claiming assault now because they see a chance to extort money from my family. The prosecution played the cabin video. Derek's own words, recorded in high definition. I don't care if she's crying. I'm Derek fucking Hall. Who's going to stop me? The courtroom went silent. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Attempted sexual assault, drug trafficking, conspiracy, witness intimidation. Derek Hall was sentenced to 23 years in federal prison. He screamed as marshals led him away. This isn't over. My father will. But his father couldn't save him. Grant Hall had his own problems. Chapter 9. Ghost Peace. The corruption trial of Grant Hall and his co-conspirators began in January. The evidence Arthur had compiled, financial records, testimony from Kirk Best and other former law enforcement, victim statements, the documented pattern of obstruction, was overwhelming. Grant Hall, Russell Bray, Roland Drake, and 12 others were convicted on various corruption charges. Grant received 8 years in federal prison and was expelled from the Senate. His family's political dynasty ended. Hall Industries, facing multiple civil lawsuits from victims and federal fraud charges related to contract manipulation, filed for bankruptcy. The lumber mill was sold to a workers' cooperative. The Hall mansion was seized as proceeds of crime and converted into a community center. By March, the Hall family's century-long dominion over Miller's Crossing had been completely dismantled. Arthur stood in the cemetery on a cold morning, looking at the small graves where James and Matthew were buried. Fresh flowers appeared there every week, left by people in town who understood what this quiet man had accomplished. Tina stood beside him, her hand in his. She was teaching again, channeling her grief into protecting other children. Therapy was helping. Some nights, she slept without nightmares. "You did what needed to be done," she said softly. "I didn't do it for justice," Arthur admitted. "I wanted revenge. I wanted them to hurt like I hurt. But you didn't become like them. You didn't just kill Derek Hall. You could have. I know what you're capable of. But you chose to destroy the system that protected him instead. You saved other women from becoming me. Other families from losing what we lost." Arthur considered this. He'd spent 22 years as the ghost, hunting evil men in foreign lands. But the greatest evil he'd faced was here, in small-town America, protected by wealth and respectability. "Ghost is done," he said. "I'm just Arthur Kirkpatrick now. Hardware store worker. Husband. Maybe someday father again," Tina said carefully. "I know we can't have biological children, but there are kids who need parents. When we're ready." He pulled her close, this woman who'd saved him once and was now saving him again. Across town, Nellie Merrill watched the news coverage from her diner. Federal prison sentences, political careers ended, a corrupt system finally purged. She smiled, poured coffee for her morning customers, and said nothing. Pedro Hobbs in Tennessee saw the same news and wept. Not from pain this time, but relief. Justice. Finally. Margaret Prince gave an interview about trauma survivors finding their voices, empowering other women to speak truth to power. And in Miller's Crossing, a town that had lived under the Hall family shadow for 178 years, people began to breathe freely. New businesses opened. Young people stopped leaving. The promise of what the town could be, without corruption, without fear, began to manifest. Arthur Kirkpatrick returned to work at the hardware store, helping customers fix their homes and build new things. Nobody bothered him anymore. Some people thanked him quietly. Others just nodded with respect. The ghost had completed his final hunt. The target wasn't just one man. It was an entire system of corruption and privilege that believed itself untouchable. Derek Hall would spend the next 2 decades in federal prison, his family's empire destroyed, his victims finally heard and believed. Arthur had promised to haunt Derek Hall's entire bloodline. He'd kept that promise, not through violence, but by stripping away the power and immunity that had defined the Halls for generations. They would live, but they would live as ordinary people, subject to the same laws and consequences as everyone else. On Sunday evenings, Arthur and Tina drove to the cemetery to visit their sons' graves. They talked to James and Matthew, telling them about their day, about their plans, about the slowly healing world around them. "We'll honor you by living," Tina would say, "by not letting what happened destroy us, by building something good from all this pain." And Arthur, the ghost who'd found peace at last, would silently promise his sons, "You mattered. Your lives, though brief, changed everything. You will never be forgotten." The sun set over Miller's Crossing, painting the Kentucky hills gold. In the gathering dusk, Arthur Kirkpatrick walked home with his wife, ready to begin again. The hunt was over. Life remained, and that, Ghost knew, was the greatest victory of all. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you